I had to resort to listening to the audiobook. I still have like an hour left.
That's okay. I'm sure you'll have enough to contribute today.
We'll see.
All
Hi,
right.
John. Hi, Dick. Hi, Eric. Hi, Lisi. Hi, everybody else.
So why don't we get started? Welcome to our second book club. It's a new thing that we've started, thankfully, with Laura taking the helm. And this month's topic is the book, The Value of a Whale. So, Laura, it's all yours.
Oh, thanks, John. So I mean, I hardly need to explain what USSEE is to most of you, but we may have a couple of people who are not so familiar jumping on. So I'll just do my little spiel and then we can talk about the book. So I'm Laura Schmitt Olabisi. I am a professor at Michigan State University in the Department of Community Sustainability, and I'm the immediate past president of USSEE, of which John is the current president. And we are a society dedicated to exploring how humans can live a good life within the boundaries of Earth's biosphere and ecosystem. So we are concerned with both human and ecological well-being. And we span the gamut from academics to public sector to nonprofit sector to private sector individuals, all trying to make a difference in that light. So if you are new to USSEE, and I see a couple of names I don't know, please keep in touch. You should receive an invitation to sign up for our newsletter after this book club discussion, and please look out for our annual conference, which is coming up June 6th to 9th in upstate New York. So I won't go too much more into that unless you have questions about it later. So yes, welcome to our second USSEE book club discussion. This is basically just an excuse for me to force me to read books that I really wanted to read. So thank you all for indulging me in that. Last fall, we talked about The Ministry for the Future, which is a fiction book by Kim Stanley Robinson, but a really interesting short-term science fiction novel about how humanity solves the climate crisis, basically. Today, we're doing nonfiction. We are delving into The Value of a Whale by Adrienne Buller, and she is a senior fellow at Commonwealth, which is a progressive think tank based in the UK. And she's been writing about climate and the green economy for a number of years, from what I gather from her resume. So we have a great group of people to dive into this book today. So I'm just going to give a very short overview for those of you who maybe didn't finish it or didn't get through the whole thing. So basically, in a nutshell, this book is a critique of what she terms green capitalism. And that means broadly market-based solutions to climate change. And her overall thesis is that these purported solutions are not actual solutions because they minimize disruption to current economic and social models, which are driving the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis and all of our ecological crises. And she goes through a range of evidence to suggest that they're basically helping already wealthy people make money off of these crises rather than solving them. So she goes through a number of these private sector solutions in the book and kind of delves into them in more detail. So the things that she gets into more detail on are carbon markets, climate finance, and the financial sector generally, which to me was the most enlightening because that's not an area that I know a lot about. And she really, I thought, had some very interesting and disturbing data and examples there about how global finance models are really not helping us solve the climate crisis and making it worse. She talks about emissions offsets and green development and payment for ecosystem services. That latter one, I'm really interested to hear what my fellow USSEE members think about that one. So I guess maybe I'll just throw it out there and ask for overall first impressions of this book. What did you think about it? Was the information new to you? Did you like it? What are some of your thoughts, positive or critiques? Would love to just kind of get an opening round of reactions. And we're small enough to be fairly informal here. So, dive in, and if I need to call on people, I will. All right, go ahead, Eric.
One of the anecdotes that I was totally blown away by was the beginning of chapter 4. And it said there was a secretive military base like under the ice in Greenland. I didn't know anything about that. I never heard of it. So I immediately started Googling it. I got to know more about this. That was, yeah, it was called Camp Century. And yeah, it was abandoned, but just the lengths people will go to to manipulate an environment and burrow into a glacier and things like that. It was just, that anecdote just really surprised me among all the research and anecdotes that she presents. I thought that was pretty cool or interesting.
Dick, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll pick up from there, and that I found it quite different from other critiques of green capitalism, and the emphasis on financial markets, as you mentioned, Laura, are, I think, the special contribution. I've always been curious. I mean, obviously, neoliberal economists find markets fascinating, so markets are the solution. It's kind of their utopic vision of having everything equated at the margins, this perfect economy. But she really turns the headlight on to, no, it's really the financial interest, it's the capitalist, it's the there's another whole calling for ecosystem services that, when you think about it, I mean, she starts with the IMF and the value of a whale from a capitalist perspective, and and then gee, that's why the World Bank has always been so interested in ecosystem services too. Is not because of, I mean, obviously they promote markets wherever they can, but it's a capitalist view of the situation. So she really puts the emphasis on the natural capital side and the capitalization of that, and whether or not it actually works is not the issue. The fact that capitalists can make money off the process is what the issue is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Eric pulled that anecdote of like a disturbing / surprising anecdote from the book. Mine was how many meetings with high level policy leaders the CEO of BlackRock sits in on. I mean, I guess I probably should have suspected this, but like having it confirmed was deeply disturbing to me. And yeah, I learned a lot about BlackRock from this book. None of it encouraging, I will say.
Yeah.
I have to say that I agree, Laura. I feel like most of what I know about BlackRock are quips from TikTok, like, and just other people doing deep dives, which isn't scientific at all, or academic, but for this woman who has done so much research to basically have backed up a lot of these statements that I've heard and witnessed, and how they literally have their paws in every single honeypot, it is fairly terrifying. Overall, I really love the book, though. I thought I want to go back through it again. It was really dense. And I found myself like rereading certain things a couple of times. The part that I just finished listening to, though, she gives a little nod to Herman Daly, which I thought was great. And when he worked for the World Bank, and how he encouraged them to be like, hey, great, we're making money off of ecological resources, and we need to create another balance sheet that shows that we are now further in debt to the earth because of those resources that we've taken. I think I understood that correctly, which I don't think that they've done that, but her sharing that that history of how Herman Daly took ecological economics into a hornet's nest was pretty special.
Yeah, if I can jump in, I think probably, I definitely like the book. It's both eye-opening and quite shocking. I think the chapter on the financial asset industry was probably, for me, one of the most densest chapters. That was challenging. It's covered a lot of ground I've never dealt with. But I think one of the most shocking things for me possibly was her conclusion that the whole 2 degrees Celsius target is basically based on nothing much but Nordhaus's thought experiment from 1975 or so. That was something I was not familiar with.
Sorry, Leon, could you say that again? I think your microphone's a little soft.
All right, now
The surprising thing was, what were you saying?
the idea that this 2 degrees Celsius target that is sort of enshrined in climate policy is basically was Nordhaus's thought experiment and is not based in the best available science. At least this is what she writes in the book. And that for me was definitely a surprise.
Yeah, I
Maybe
mean,
I
I
could-
think from an ecological standpoint, you know, so I'm actually an ecologist by training, not an economist, so I'm kind of a little, you know, little outsider among you in a way, but
Same here.
yeah. I mean, I think it's complex, right? So I mean, the scientists' best estimate of how we can with high certainty avoid the tipping points is 1.5 or under, right? And then as we get higher, the likelihood of one or more of those disastrous tipping points activating goes up. I think but that's kind of hard for the public in general to understand a lot of times, which is why that shorthand of 2 degrees gets put out there. But yeah, it's interesting to note that it's not really as if science is saying, hey, below 2 we're fine, and above 2, you know, disaster. It's more nuanced than that. Yeah. Go ahead, Clive.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Dick, by the way. I haven't seen you for a while. Okay, so I would say that for a start on the 2 degree thing, I think that this actually came out of the science because the science was dealing with equilibrium models. So the original science was actually doing a shift from no climate change to a climate change scenario. And this was equilibrium modeling. So this got enshrined in it. So they had this thing about double CO2 at one time. The double CO2 got translated into the 2 degrees. And therefore it came from the science, not from Nordhaus. Nordhaus is a terrible scavenger and a cherry picker. He takes whatever he can find from anywhere that will suit his own theories. But the interesting thing, I think, with what's been raised with the book is the extent to which economics actually impacts on capitalism, or capitalism is using mainstream economics. And I would say it's actually the latter. The economists are living in a totally fictional world. Nordhaus is a classic example. He doesn't explain anything about the economy. He explains nothing about climate change. So why does this man get a Nobel, or a Swedish bank prize, Swedish Bankers Prize in economics? You know, why does he get this? Because he's a functionary that suits the financiers and the capitalists. Now that's important, right? So that's what the book does, is that it raises the issue about the financiers and the capitalists. I know you guys love Herman Daly, but I would also have to say that Herman was also, I feel, trapped in the same kind of mode of trying to steer a path where he's trying to correct the system while also playing with it. So, you know, promoting things like natural capital, ecosystem services, these actually play directly to capitalism and to capitalist ways of thinking about the environment. And so I would say that, you know, he was a very brave man. He left the World Bank, very good. But the thing was that he never gave up on some of these concepts, which I think are very problematic, and which the financiers love. They love this stuff. They love ecosystem services. I mean, look what they're doing with it now. They don't give a damn about whether the theory is correct or not. It's just a rhetorical game for them. And it has policy impact. That's the thing that you can see documented, right? So you see the documentation of the policy impact that results from a bunch of rhetoric coming from mainstream economists that has nothing to do with any real economy. Just a little for.
Yeah. No, I think Adrienne Buller would agree with you. I think she has a lot of the same concerns about, that you just raised. Any other thoughts about the book?
I thought it was an interesting contrast with our webinar last year with Tony Annette and Cathonomics. And I think Tony's approach was much more in line with the Herman Daly's approach of how do we, how do we tame the capitalist system, like a social democracy, have taxing billionaires and uh, things like that, having a strong social safety net, strong environmental regulations and protections. So kind of taming capitalism and using that to promote the common good. I think Value of the Whale was a much more head-on critique of the capitalist system itself, and saying that the daily Tony Annette approach of taming capitalism at the end of the day is not going to be sufficient. But when I was reading it, I just I kept going back to Tony Annette's talk last year. It's a good contrast.
Yeah, I agree. There's different, and that's what I love about the society hosting all these different voices, right? I like that we have different perspectives on, what what needs to be done. So one question to throw out there, and again, anyone feel free to throw out their own questions too. I came with a few, but this can be very democratic. One question I had is, so like I said, she goes through a number of, kind of private sector climate solutions that she puts under this umbrella of green capitalism. And we've just mainly been talking about the financial sector aspect of it. But she also talks about carbon markets, emissions offsets, green development, payment-free system services. We talked about that a little bit. And kind of the implication is that they're all equally a no-go. Like none of them are going to work. And I guess I wanted to throw out to this illustrious group, do you think that's the case? Do you think all of these are kind of equally a no-go? Can some of them be salvaged for some purposes? What are your thoughts about that?
I think it's
go ahead.
Oh,
Yeah.
sorry. Does Lisa want to talk?
I was going to say something, but I'm
Yeah,
not
please.
going to, in part because I'm the person that comes to the book group having not read the book.
Oh,
So I actually just kind of looked at the
Well,
blurb for the book and then got on and listened to a couple of interviews with her. I think I have some kind of idea of what she did in the book, and I did get on and order the book today, but I haven't read the book, so I can't give any kind of detailed critique of the book. So that's why, but I thought I'd get on and listen anyway to what people had to say.
I love that you show up to most of our meetings, Lacey. It's really nice.
But you shouldn't go to a book group having not read the book.
I mean, I think voyeurs are welcome. I think it's fine.
I think it's fairly common, actually.
Yeah, right. Well, I didn't finish. I was gonna say, I think it's so interesting that she comments, she calls out the fact that modern economists call people who are looking to shift and change the modern economic system as utopianists, and then all of us here are calling modern economists utopianists, right? So it's really interesting to me because it's this idea, like we're all coming at this from different perspectives and essentially different realities, right? Like because we have different priorities and we're just looking at things through different lenses, and we can't know something until we know it. And so to your question, Laura, I just wonder, like, maybe we don't need any of it and maybe we need all of it, but then we don't need just those things. We need more things too, right? Like, it's just so interesting that we're in this position in our society where things are just black and white. It's one thing or the other. One thing is going to save us. It feels very, it feels very fundamentalist to me, like fundamentalist religion, like, oh, there's only one savior. And it's like, maybe, but probably not. Right. And so I don't know. That's where my brain goes. I hesitate to say that we need any of it or that we don't need any of it. That's my take on it.
I come in. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, yeah.
So, I mean, one of the things here I would say is that, what is it we're trying to change? So what is the transformation that we're looking for? And what she's highlighting is that there's a capitalist system. The capitalist system has changed over time. It's not the same as it was in Marx's time. It's not about industrial factories, gathering the wealth. It's now about the financiers and the bankers. And this is a new stage of capitalism. So the answer to the question, I would say, is about whether the mechanisms that you're going to put in place, the public policy you're going to adopt, that you think is going to help transform the environment to something else, or the system to something else, whether those mechanisms play to financial capitalism. And it's very clear to me that carbon trading, biodiversity offsetting, and ecosystem services, as being instituted, play directly to the financiers and to the capitalists. So it's a direct mechanism. Now, we can say there are many ways in which we might do alternative things, fine. But these mechanisms play within a certain system, and we do have a system. It's not up for grabs, and it's not anybody's perspective that changes it. Capitalism is there. It's very strong, and it has institutions which are very real, and people who are also very real and are playing power games. Now, you play power games with these people, you better be aware of what you're doing and which mechanisms you're putting forward. I go back to Herman, right? Herman tried, and this was at the time when financial capitalism was actually on the rise. Neoliberalism only really got going around the time that Herman was appointed to the bank and the Washington Consensus arose. So he actually kind of got dumped in at the point at which this was actually going really bad and was starting to roll the other way. So it was actually a very bad time to start putting things like natural capital and ecosystem services forward, because unfortunately it was ideal for these guys. It really played to them. So I would say that's what you have to be aware of. You have to look at the structure of the system and understand how these mechanisms operate within the system that we have, which is very real. It's not a multiple reality. It's a single fucking reality. It's right there, in our faces, I'm afraid, every day. So we have to think about it in those terms, I think.
Yeah, if I can jump in on that.
Go ahead.
I think it's a good point you make. It reminds me a little bit of a book I recently reviewed, The Frog Resolution, which I think is why USSEE reached out to me in the first place, where they also point out that you're effectively joining the table with people who are very good at this game, as you say. They know exactly what they're doing, and you're playing by their book and by their rules. And I have the impression that I think the author of this book was making the point that ecologists and such come to this table often with very little experience, whereas the economists around that same table have been there for decades, have made effectively the rules of the game, and are typically aided by lawyers and other backers with extensive knowledge. Whereas, ecologists coming in typically do not have any of that, and basically you're at a disadvantage there. So, yeah, but whether these solutions that she proposes, or whether any of them are any good, is a very valid question. At the same time, I mean, I can sympathize with what Alison is saying there, in that, should we just throw shit at the wall and see what sticks? Because we are dealing with such a complex crisis, and or some like to say polycrisis, which I think is a very nice way of looking at it. That there's absolutely no one single solution. You're absolutely correct there. I think it's going to be a matter of and once we start considering solutions.
Can I? Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Stuart.
Can I go? Yes. Could I just go back to what Clive was saying and agree with him that And by the way, I haven't read it, the book. I've only glimpsed it myself, but I get the gist of it. But I would agree with Clive that the proposals that are referred to, ecosystem services, a blatant example, quite simply play to capitalism. So I would agree with that. But if I just simply refer myself to the title, the value of a whale, the valuing system, the process of conceptually evaluating a resource, in the same way that in physics one has to delineate units in order to put a value upon a resource, in this case a whale, assumes, and here I want to use sort of biophysical terms, but it assumes separability. That is, in order to identify a unit or put units upon a resource, you have to assume conceptual separability to identify those units. And therefore, the mechanism of valuing uses that fundamental conceptual dynamic. And the point about the reference to the whale is that the whale is an ecological phenomenon. And what we're supposedly concerned about in 2024 is an ecological bottom line. And the propounding of a way of being that would address our ecological crisis and would pay heed to the requirement for ecological improvement and ecological, ultimately, obviously, sustainability. And the point, and I've been looking for several decades now at economics basic concepts from the point of view of ecology. And the fundamental thing about ecology, of course, is that its sustainability is based on ecologically cohesive ecosystems. Sustainability in an ecosystem emanates from the ecological cohesiveness of the functioning of that or those ecosystems. So where you have a process of economic valuation, which is what she's getting at with the title, you inculcate separability into the process, and separability is the harbinger of unsustainability. So her title is wonderful. As I say, I haven't read the book properly yet, but her title is wonderful. And it's challenging the absolute basic dynamics of all economic valuation, which is assumed that we can separate everything that we conceptualize and still assume that it can be ecologically sustainable. And that is it's antithetical to achieving sustainability. So I think the title is wonderful. It's setting one system against the other, the capitalist, or the more fundamentally the economic against the ecological. And so she poses the question very well. And I think it's not until we start evaluating our society's endeavors against biophysical or ecological terms that we can even begin to start devising new methodologies of living.
Yeah, Stuart, I think you maybe didn't read it, but you're definitely on the same wavelength, because I think she makes exactly the same point in the book. And I think she might add to that ecological and social, right?
Indeed.
So metrics
indeed.
of equity and justice and human well-being, and yeah, absolutely.
Indeed. I mean, because as a human society, we are patently ecological beings, which, by the way, I think we've forgotten. And so, yeah, all the harbingers of sustainability apply to society ecologically, to socio-ecological society in just the same way. Yes, you're quite right.
So this is an interesting discussion. So, Clive, let me know if I'm picking up what you're putting down correctly here. So, it seems like what you're saying is that because we live in a global framework of accumulative capitalism, capitalism that is essentially making a lot, the whole thing is oriented to make a lot of money for a very few people. All of these tools are going to be in service of that. If we lived in a different system or had a different system, perhaps these tools could be used, but because they're serving the dominant paradigm, there's no way they can kind of get out of that. So what we need, in order for them to be effective, they would have to be instituted in a different framework. Is that what you were kind of saying?
It is exactly what you're saying. We're referring ourselves to an entirety, a complete ethic, which is global in its reach. I mean, obviously, I don't even need to say that. So, but it's the entirety of its conceptual proposition, which is ecologically. My term is illegitimate. It's conceptually illegitimate, or ecologically illegitimate. So the whole shebang is exactly as you say. It is actually defined in order to facilitate that conceptually infinite accumulation. You're absolute. That's what it's all about, and of course, it's very successful. If we look at the inequality across the world, it's absolutely successful. So to use any of its tools, its toolkit, is antithetical to the achievement of ecosystem sustainability. So yes, your summary is completely right.
I think one of the issues here, right, is that is what you expect from an institution. So institutional setups. So if you say, for example, that if we were in a different system, maybe we could use these instruments. The problem is that these instruments are instruments of capitalism, right? So what do they, I mean, as Stuart's been pointing out, one of the things that they imply is, for a start, separating things off into commodity form, which means that you separate them out and you make them into a commodity which is separated from everything else. So it can be traded and so on and so forth. So even if you were in a system, right, say a pre-capitalist system, and you start instituting something like biodiversity trading, carbon trading, you have to institute that in the context which is capitalist. So you have to have private property rights, you have to have commodity form, you have to have commensuration, right? And this is really, I think, what Stuart is actually is actually picking up on, the separation, is the kind of things about commensuration that we discuss in values. So what you're doing is you're making things equal that aren't equal, while also commodifying them and separating them off from the things that are really important that they actually required for their dependency. And this it's the same issue whether you're in the social or the ecological world, because in the ecological world, it's very straightforward. We have ecosystem structure. And in the social world, it's very clear we have social structure. People are not separated. You treat people as individuals making money, like an entrepreneur makes money as if he's an individual. Of course, he's not an individual. He's got an entire empire underneath him of people working for him, and he's extracting the resources from them, right? Exactly. So it's the same thing with the social structure.
Yeah.
So I think that you have to understand these as institutional instruments, and what do they do when they're instituted? And they aren't just in thin air. They require structure. They require legal structure, state support, institutional structures, rules, regulations, laws, norms of behavior, and so on. And that's what happens when you start doing these things. You create that. So you would be, in a pre-capitalist society, you'd be instituting capitalism. It wouldn't be any good for you. It wouldn't help the environment.
Yeah, well said. Well, so all of this brings me to, I guess, a critique I had of the book. And believe me, I loved it and I thought it was very eye-opening. But I would have loved for her to get into solutions. And she says, in the book that wasn't her aim. but I also feel like she works for a think tank, so they must be working on something that they're, like proposing or putting out there. So I feel like she could have spent one chapter talking about some of that. And to be fair, in interviews, she has mentioned a few things that she sees as kind of bright spots or ways forward. She was fairly overall positive about the Inflation Reduction Act in the US, for example. But let me put it out to this group. So if these are not solutions, what does ecological economics or other economic frameworks say about what might be a different way forward?
I wonder if she's hesitant to give out solutions because that would be doing the same exact thing that the dominant paradigm has given us, which is a homogenized view of what solutions look like. And it's their one solution. It's their way or the highway. The market controls things. That is what happens, right? I think it's really interesting if we think about going back to the whole social idea of ecology and what I'm trying to say is I think about an indigenous tribe whose whole world revolves around a whale, right? The value of a whale to that tribe is going to be so different than, say, an indigenous tribe in Arizona who has no idea what a whale really, they don't have anything to do with the whale, right? But they're super, like a nopales, cactus is going to be very high of their value scale, right? So value is contextual and dependent on where we each are. So I just wonder if she possibly begin to give solutions when one of real, and so are all of we, right? So I just wonder if the idea for her to give the book of problems is then for all of us in our small bioregions to potentially start solving these issues from our own places. That's my thought on that.
But
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably all in agreement, Allison, that there's no silver bullet to these crises. Yeah, I mean, I do wonder though if there could have been a couple of like case studies or like examples of like here's one thing that's happening here that is different, or and the reason I say that is because I teach undergrads, and I see, I would love to assign parts of this book to them, and I think I may do that. And I see that they're really struggling to grasp solutions, right? They know what the problems are, and I'm trying to give them okay, here's a path for change. Here's a thing you could do. Here's some solutions. And Eric, I know you've wrestled with this with your teaching too. What are your thoughts?
I was just going back to page 261. She mentions Eleanor Ostrom and governing the commons, and as an alternative, right? We have markets and we have regulation, but then kind of in between are these civil society institutions where we could manage shared resources, commons, through collective action, which is difficult, but it does present one alternative model. And she does go on to mention that Ostrom herself advocated for a diversity of methods unique to local needs and conditions, like Allison was saying. So that could be one potential solution or alternative conception to the capitalist system.
Hello. Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Stuart. Yeah. Did you want
Hello.
to say
Can I just respond to the general point Alison was making, although the reception was pretty broken up? I think the fundamental point Alison was making is extremely pertinent. That is that we all have a context, and it's appropriate for any one person to respond to and be aware of that context and work in recognition of that context. That's extremely practicable. That can apply to all 8 billion of us. But the factor I'd like to bring in, which is this come out of the work I've been doing, is that what is the economic proposition is fundamentally conceptualized. It's a concept. Economics is a conceptual construct, and its proposition is conceptual. But what we all have, because we're all part of this ecological world, what we all have is an intuitive capability, which is completely subjugated really from education on, from early childhood onwards. But we all, and so I think the point Alison was making brings in and allows for the functioning of our intuitive take on what, in our context, in our, whether you're in Arizona or up in the Bering Straits, our intuition, one thing that it allows us to do is to recognize, the term I'm using is sufficiency in our context. And the reason I think that is powerful is that sufficiency is anathema to the pursuit and dynamic of economics. Economics propounds the maximization of everything in sight. And hence, as you were saying, Laura, the accumulation of maximization of the accumulation of resources. So the notion of people working in acknowledgement of their context and intuitively referring themselves to what they actually need, I think is a very valuable and ubiquitous potential starting point.
Thanks for that, Stuart.
Can I add something?
Yeah, Lisi, please.
I guess, and this obviously because I didn't read the book, it doesn't necessarily speak directly to the book, but we seem to be preoccupied with the goal of solutions. And I often think that it might be productive to engage the question of, well, what if there aren't any solutions? Because the reality of our situation appears to be that there aren't, okay? The climate crisis goes on unabated. The mass extinction crisis goes on unabated. And so it seems like instead of solutions, I guess I'm just throwing this out here, instead of solutions, if it might be worthwhile to get a better understanding of the nature of our alienation from the earth. There's this profound duality. It exists. This economic system is functioning as if it's not connected to the earth, even though it's a profoundly material system. And so I guess I often wonder in this pursuit of solutions, whether or not it might be beneficial to say, okay, let's look at the reality that we're confronted with, that we don't seem to be able to do anything about this. And let's see if we can get a better handle on the nature of our duality, the level of our disembeddedness from the rhythm and dynamic of the more than human world. Because that seems to be a reality that we're confronted with. And, I sometimes think, just in our personal lives and in our, the lives that we lead to try to make change, we deal with this really kind of broken world where, in our personal lives, we're continually frustrated because we can't actualize our lives in the way that we want. And in our movements to try to change things, we're frustrated because we can't seem to make the changes that we want. So I don't have any solutions, obviously, and I didn't read the book, but I'm just suggesting that that might be a productive conversation to have, although people don't generally want to have that conversation. Also, let me just say, in terms of sustainability, you know, we talk about sustainability, but if you think about this kind of interplay between the economy and the environment in this dialectical process, you know, what are we sustaining now? I mean, where are we in terms of the metric of sustainability now? Just in terms, for example, of climate change. And so we're responding to this notion of sustainability, which may be completely misaligned with where we actually are right now. And I think that creates a complexity for solutions and how we think about that. And that's all I have to say. That my 2 bits.
Can I just follow up? Because I quite like what Lizzie's saying. It's quite funny in a way, but it's interesting, right? Because the things you're kind of mentioning here, the reflection on reality, the conundrums that we're under, I think there are some universals as well. So although Alison's emphasizing the contextual, which is also can be very important depending on where you're at, you know, what is it you're trying to address? There are universals as well, right? I mean, we have climate change is a pretty universal issue. Biodiversity loss is a universal issue, right? And these are big issues because we have big systems that are also universal, which are global and are pushing things. But at the same time, I don't like problem solutions because, you know, when I start doing history of thought and you look at where does this idea of problem solution come from, it's totally mechanistic. It arises with modernity. It comes with the Enlightenment. It comes with Descartes. It comes with a very mechanistic way of thinking about the world. And engineers love it, right? It's engineering thought, and technocrats love it. And technocrats are stuffed full in, you know, the governments are stuffed full of technocrats. Government departments are stuffed full of technocrats. Technocracy is going to solve everything. Technology is going to solve everything. It just needs the right problem for it to solve it. All the technology is there. It just wants the problem. So you convert everything into a problem. So you've got the solution already. I mean, they've got geoengineering technology. They just want a problem to apply it to. You know, we got the military, we just need a war so we can apply it. Give us a problem, then we can apply the solution that we've already got. So I really worry about when we get into this problem solution thing. So if you criticize a book for not having solutions, I think you've already fallen into the trap of this mechanistic thinking, actually. And as ecological economists, I think we should be really wary of that, right? So if I'm dealing with a mechanistic system or aspects of a mechanistic system, like a clock, a car, or whatever, fine, problem solution. Let me deal with that way. But that's not what we're dealing with, right? As ecological economists, we know that. We're dealing with a lot more than just mechanistic systems. We're dealing with ecology, social systems, and change and evolution. Therefore, I think it does actually then put it into this kind of context of we're thinking about pathways. Whatever we implement is going to have a dynamic effect, and we know that we will not know what that effect will be, right? We're smart enough to know that. We're not the politicians selling solutions. We know that when we put a policy in place, it can have all sorts of repercussions in a complex system. Therefore, we head down a pathway. We hope the pathway will be better than the one we're on, right? So that's what we're trying to do. But that also opens up the box to multiple ways forwards. And we should be very honest about that, right? So we're looking at multiple solutions and multiple ways ahead, but they're not solutions in the traditional sense. We're not solving anything. We're actually looking for ways forward that will be better. So yeah, commons and commoning, maybe this is a better way to go, but commons and commoning is not a single thing. It's not a solution. It's a set of institutions. So, you know, Ellen Ostrom was opening up a box in the right direction. But she again got the Swedish Bankers Prize, right? Because the Swedish bankers realized that they could capture half of her discourse and use it for their own ends. So it didn't go far enough and it didn't go in the right direction. And she was just starting to realize that when she unfortunately, you know, got the pancreas cancer and died. But she was starting to break away from that that line, because it's not a solution. It's a set of institutions that take us on a different path, which is a much more profitable path, and it's been a good path in the past. So maybe it's a good way to go, but we shouldn't sell it as a solution. We should sell it as a dynamic, different way of living, a different way of being, a different economic system, and a different interaction with ecosystems, which has lots of benefits and lots of ways forward that would be better.
Well, I have to say, Clive, I take your point, and I actually really like the language of pathways and futures rather than solutions. I think that is well taken. I think, you know, maybe a better way to put it is like, where are those pathways of hope, right? And Alicia, I love what you said about the disconnection that we have with nature, that's really on a deeply emotional and spiritual level. And I would say with each other too. I mean, I think that that's like, you know, really connected in our society today. And just a little anecdote. So one of the assignments I gave my students this semester was to put all of their electronic devices down and go out in nature for an hour, however they define nature, and write an essay about it. And the things they said are always so profound, like the fact that they had not done that in recent memory. And many of them commented after only an hour in the woods, they felt a connection with nature on a very visceral level. Yeah, excellent. Yes, exactly. So drawing from some of those very old pedagogies, as Clive is pointing out. So yeah, I love the point you made too.
I love that. I love all of this conversation. Sorry, my internet connection super unstable. One thing I wanted to comment was, Clive, you know, just a reminder, there are engineers in nature too. Like, think about a beaver, right? A beaver is an engineer, and a beaver is an engineer who is working with what they have available in a river. And a big, huge storm is going to come through one day and destroy their den that they've made. And then they have to create solutions through their engineering to change and create a new home and interact with that river again. I think maybe when we use the word solution, and this, you know, then we're getting into like the etymology of words, but and how we all understand words and how they work. But sometimes when we use the word solution, it's like, this is the solution. This is the one. Going back to that idea of fundamentalism, it's like, this is the thing. This is the silver bullet. And maybe that's the problem. And I do like Lisi's observation, which is like, why are we even bothering with these? Because we are kind of on a path to destruction with everything that's happening. And but you know, we're also really focusing on humans and like the brains of humans, instead of actually just using the natural world to start creating the infrastructure of how we go about our interactions together, our interactions with how we value things, our interactions with how we live, how we eat. I think that the answers are right in front of us. We just have to get over ourselves as humans to actually access them. And it's going to require like really, really intense culture change. And it's going to require us to put our phones down for an hour or two at a time. And it's going to require us to create new relationships with each other and with our land and with everything, which is a really big ask. But I would say that you know, thinking that there aren't engineers, or that, you know, humans are terrible for being engineers or technocrats, whatever, like, I think anything we see in the human world, we can probably find a parallel in the natural world to some extent. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's well said, Alison. I agree with that.
Thanks, Stuart.
Yeah, I'm just going to jump in with a few thoughts that all this raises. I mean, the problem you highlight, Lizzie, like although and Laura as well, is that she doesn't propose solutions in this book. This is something I've noticed quite a bit in other reportages I have been reading. And it's very easy for readers, in general, for all of us, I think it's very easy to highlight the problem, but coming up with solutions is, of course, is a completely different kind of fish. And I must admit that in my darker moments, I do sometimes wonder, what if we have backed ourselves into a corner to such an extent that, to be frank, there are no good solutions. I mean, it's not a very popular thing to say, obviously. And it's certainly, I can imagine if you're in front of a classroom, you can't really tell your pupils, sorry guys, we're fucked. I can see the panic. You'll get tapped on your hands by the school board afterwards. And the point that was being raised here now about the problem solution, the solution thing, like, oh, we're thinking, if we're talking about solutions, we're falling in this dichotomy. Well, there's a problem, there's a solution for it. It's very sort of one-to-one linear relationship. Try and tackle this as engineers. Yeah, absolutely. That certainly doesn't seem to work. So I think we need to think. It depends a little bit how do you define the solution? Do you define it within this very narrow linear? I have a problem. There is a solution, and I'm going to search for a solution to the problem. Or are we gonna think wider, as others here have been saying, like solutions gonna have to come from something far more invasive, a complete, as you said, change in our culture and in our way of being, which is for most people, I think, unimaginable. And certainly, I think for people who are fully leaving power, it's unimaginable. That's unpopular. I think I'll leave my thoughts there.
Can I just make one more observation? I think, if I was to offer a critique, I would say, if we think that sort of understanding processes and, characterizing our situation and what we do as finding ways forward, that sort of thing. We sort of connect to processes and dynamics at work and think about things in dialectical and moving terms. I sometimes look at ecological economics, and I have great admiration for Herman, but I don't think the framework he set up gave us very good tools for doing that. We have kind of a muddled sense of what the economic system is from ecological economics, and we have kind of a muddled sense of how we got here. What are the processes at work? We know that there's a disconnect. Ecological economics has been very good at pointing out we are connected in a material sense, but much less good at kind of talking about the processes which lead us to this profound disconnect. And so I'm wondering whether, in reflection, we actually do need more kind of inquiry into that, not so much a preoccupation with how we connect, but more of a preoccupation with how we became disconnected. Might be beneficial.
Don't you think that would require an auditing of our entire lives?
It would require what, Alice?
An auditing, like an audit of our lives. Like I just wonder, like, how are we? Well, anyway, you respond. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I wonder, like, what did this bring up for everybody as like, what am I going to do in my life to start? What am I going to do with this anger, this fury that I have to start making the change that is an active protest against the issues that she presents, that we all already know are there because we're currently living, like, we're all alive and breathing, right? So we are witness to what's happening. So sorry, Laura, I'm like taking over, but I'm really interested, like, what did this book bring up for each of you and make you want to change? Like, does it make you want to divest your stocks to something different? Like, I don't own stocks. I barely have a savings account, but right. So like, what does this what does this bring up for each of you that makes you want to create, to be very cliche, the change that you want to see? Because I think that's the inquiry that you're actually asking, Nisi, is like, well, at least that's what it brings up for me. It's like, that's the inquiry that we should each be having to this book, to these issues.
I think we're dealing with, you know, what I would call a broken world.
But we don't have to be broken people in that world.
What?
We don't have to be broken people in that world.
No. I think we all try to navigate our way forward, but I think we're dealing with a world that presents us with profound contradictions.
Sure,
And
but we,
you know, one of the most profound is, can we do anything about this?
right.
If doing something about it is staving off climate change or stopping mass extinction, you know, you could get really frustrated in that, or you could, you know, try to navigate out in your own life some way of trying to respond to that.
Right.
So, I mean, I think the rage that people feel is a rage of trying to deal with a world that is complex, broken, and you're trying to figure out how to navigate your way through it.
Agreed.
I think that's the reality of what we confront.
Agreed.
So I don't have any solutions.
Can I just
Go ahead,
come
Clive.
in a little? Yeah, thanks. One thing is, I think this actually links back to what Liam was saying in a way, because I don't think it's easy to make problems or to problematize things, quite honestly. I mean, I just spent my life being a critic, you know, and I'm known for being very critical. And I can tell you, it's not easy. It's not easy socially or psychologically. And people think, oh, you're a critic, blah, 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 you know, whatever. But this is actually not easy to problematize things. And I think it links to what Alison is actually picking up on and what Lizzie and Alison are talking about, which is what I would describe as the psychosocial aspect here, right? So that the psychology of the individual links to the social aspect, and that we're all living in structure, but we're agents as well, and that we're struggling with what we do. But you can do things, right? I mean, you can empower yourself. I mean, I don't know if you own stocks and you're an ecological economist, maybe you should get rid of them. That's for sure. But maybe there's lots of other things you can do, right? I mean, it's empowering. I mean, I do lots of little things, like I use a pencil rather than a pen, because pens are all made of metal and plastic, and I don't like metal and plastic, and it's an extractive resource, and pencils are more renewable. And I've done that for 40 years, you know. Okay, and people will say, well, that's really stupid. It doesn't do anything. Well, actually, it does a lot for me. It empowers me. It's something very simple that I can do and I can control as an agent, right? And then people say, why are you using a pencil? And then I can tell them why I'm using a pencil, right? So, yeah, stupid individual action, you might say, but same point, it's an empowering action. And you can do lots of little things. Okay, fine. So, you know, we don't have to be consequentialist about everything. We can also think about ourselves psychologically and socially. And also, I think, you know, practices that we undertake as individuals can be examples to others, and we can influence others through these. And we shouldn't underestimate that, you know, what we're doing and so on. So, I mean, it's like, you know, again, it's a pathway kind of thing, I would say, rather than this kind of problem solution aspect. But the psychosocial aspect, I think, is what is being now picked up on and discussed here. And this is this complex part of where we struggle we're captured in times, in structures. This is exactly why I would actually take issue with what Leon said. You know, it's not easy for people to actually criticize the system. Be an economist, right? Get trained as an economist, have 3 degrees in economics, and then try to criticize economics. Good luck. And then get a job in an economics department and criticize the economists. Good luck, right? Where do you end up? You end up leaving the bloody country and going somewhere else and becoming a civil servant in Australia or something, and then they sack you for publishing a paper on environment, in ecosystems trading. I mean, it's easy to criticize. I can tell you, it's not.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can probably relate to you, Clive, in that way on this call. Stuart, did you want to say something?
Could I just briefly go back to what Ilse was saying? about how have we arrived at this broken predicament. And I would say that underpinning all of it, underpinning the whole economic conceptual structure, is the actual process as Homo sapiens of conceptualizing the world. What I've discovered to my own satisfaction is that the very process of conceptualizing the world actually assumes separability in being able to identify, as I said earlier, concepts and objects and stuff. So it actually emanates from how we see the world. And so it's a very, very fundamental thing that we're questioning, I think. And that's why I mentioned in our intuition, because to me that is a manifestation of our sensing our being part of a completely cohesive world. We get a sense. I mean, none of us have PhDs in everything so that we can be here this evening knowing everything and recognizing it as broken. How, for example, Ilse said very clearly, she feels that we're in a broken situation. How have you arrived at that, Ilse? And I think you've done it intuitively. And I think that's wonderfully important and fundamental, because it's a process of sensing and feeling the entirety of what we're part of. Whereas concepts assume objectification, commodification, and it's fundamentally a separability of the world we're part of. And it's not separable. So I think it's a very good point Ilse is making. And I think the inference is that it's a very fundamental situation that we're in that we conceptualize the whole world and assume it's going to work according to our control. And it's patently not working. So
let me just respond and say that I don't think it's just intuitive. So, for example, as a woman, trying to have a family and a profession, the kind of tensions and the broken nature of the world, and the way in which the system does not lend itself to doing the kinds of things that we know is valuable to do, caring for family, caring for parents, caring for children, you know, creating a home, all of that. I mean, women feel that tension very, very, very in a very real material way.
Yes.
And, you know, it's driven many of us half crazy, you know, so it's not just an intuitive sense that things are wrong. It's a sense that we just can't quite get. We just can't. We're always running up against trying to navigate this world that is not easily navigated for us. And I think we feel the same way in terms of our alienation from the earth. You know, we talk about stocks and owning stocks, but you know, and I'm obviously an older woman, so I'm in retirement. You know, I have a 401k. What do I do about that? You know, invest in green businesses. You know, it's a contradiction.
Yes.
You know, I have to try to get some kind of rate of return, I suppose, or live, you know, a completely different kind of life. And I don't have a very extravagant life, but I'm just saying we feel those tensions.
Indeed, yes.
In very real material ways. Or I do.
Yeah.
Great example, Lacey. Thank you. I do want to take a little time to invite, we have a few folks on that haven't had the chance to weigh in yet. I just want to open it, no pressure if you don't want to say anything, but if you want to jump in and give your thoughts on the book or on this discussion, now's your chance. I see a few that we haven't heard from. Again, no pressure, but if you want to jump in there, go ahead.
I guess I haven't said anything, so I will.
Go ahead, John.
I'll say this. For me, ecological economics was very important for me to find. I started out, to Clive's point, as an engineer, aerospace engineering, and then went into finance, and then ultimately it was either physics or economics, and somehow I found my way into ecological economics, and it was very good for me at RPI. And I guess some of the discussion I agree with, some of it I don't, in the sense of, are we a broken planet? Absolutely. Are we broken people? Absolutely. But the notion, and I think this is one of the problems I have of ecological economics, of not having solutions or offering those, I think is one of our problems as a field. And I'm not saying there is a solution. I don't believe there is a solution. I think it's a set of solutions, or a set of possible solutions, of using those and making improvements in our situation. And I think oftentimes, and I think Clive, Lisi, Allison, Leon, you're all right in the sense of, yeah, we often put out these, yeah, this is the solution. Well, no, it's probably not. But there is probably a set of solutions that can lead to another set of solutions that can lead to another set of solutions, where we can maybe find our pathway to hopefully come to some improvement. And I think without offering that hope or those aspects, ecological economics, we might as well not exist, because we're, hey, this is wrong. Yeah, it's wrong. What are we going to do about it? And I think that's ultimately some of the things that I took away from the book, of, what do we do about things and how do we go there? And it's not easy. It's like I said, there's no one solution, but I think if we go down this road of ultimately throwing our hands up and saying, there, and I'm not saying that's what you guys are saying, but there's no solutions, then we might as well not call ourselves ecological economists. And I think that's some of the things that I took away. So.
Yeah, John, I think you're putting your finger on one thing I was trying to articulate earlier, which is, what is the hope that we give people? What is the way forward? What is a potential way forward? And I think one thing that I'm in the Department of Community Sustainability, and that's like for a reason, right? One thing that I've seized on is, when we look at the entire global capitalist system, it seems pretty daunting to say, okay, we got to get rid of that and, like start over. But when you're talking about working with folks, and to Allison's point, in your community where you are, you actually can get some traction on some pretty significant things. And it also, I think, helps with that sense of alienation that we all feel now, that our country is really, in the US, I know a lot of you are not in the US, our country is really divided. People are lonelier than ever, and we're all on our phones all day, like instead of doom scrolling, going out and meeting with people to see what you can do on the ground about a practical problem, that's what I suggest my students do. And that's what I'm trying to speak to myself to do as well. Because working at the local level, you can actually have a pretty big influence on a lot of things. At the local level, there are decisions made about housing and transportation and food and even energy. Here in Lansing, we have our own utility, right? It could be a green utility. So yeah, maybe that's that's one path forward that I see, but yes, I take all of your points that, you know, coming up with the grand solution par excellence that we're going to implement for everybody on the planet is doing the same thing that we're critiquing. I don't want to do that. All right. Well, I mean, this discussion got really deep. I guess I shouldn't be surprised with this group of people on the call. Again, does anybody want to say, you know, some final thoughts or something they haven't had the chance to explore from the book yet? Question.
My final thought is just gratitude for all of you being here and for, you know, volleying ideas and thoughts back and forth, like in challenging yet respectful ways. And I just appreciate all of your brains and your hearts for being here.
Likewise. Yeah, it's really fun that you all showed up. Okay, well, maybe I can pose another final question. Is there a book that you would like to talk about in our next book club discussion? Or one that you want us to make you read? So we'll put it on the book club.
Well, I don't know if this could be a good book club book, but has anybody read The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin?
I read a lot of Le Guin. I don't recall that one.
The Dispossessed is really good. It's a fiction, obviously. But basically it's a book about an anarchist society that there's a revolution on the main planet and they revolt, and instead of the government killing them all, they gave them the moon. And so then this anarchist society moves to the moon. And as much as they try to be completely separate from the big main planet, they are inextricably linked. And it's beautiful and wild and not very long and not as dense. So I don't know, just maybe it would be interesting to do a fiction book every year and a nonfiction book every year. So not necessarily a vote, but if you haven't read it and you guys need some light, fun reading, like it's worth your time. It's great.
Sounds awesome. I'm definitely going to read it, whether we have it for book club or not. So I don't think I've read that one. And to your point, I actually like the idea of having nonfiction in there because I think in this conversation, we touched on the importance of imagination, right? And intuition and like tapping into creative visioning of what those pathways forward might be. And I think, you know, nonfiction writers help, particularly science fiction has a lot of that in it, right? Both good and bad pathways.
Do 100%. Yeah. But the reality is that like, we're not going to get out of the situation unless we imagine a way out.
Yeah.
That's all there is to it.
All right. Well, there aren't any other final thoughts. I just want to thank you all for joining us on this lovely afternoon. Clive, I see that you embrace the true spirit of book club, that you have a glass of wine with you, so I'm going to have to do that.
Well, you see, we're in a different time.
Yeah, it's a little early where I am, but
for some of us it's too early.
Yeah, well,
yeah, it's 1 o'clock here.
In Vienna is nighttime. In Vienna, you have a glass of wine during the day anyway, so.
Exactly. But thank you all. It was a pleasure, and hope to see many of you at the conference in June.
Laura, thank you.
Absolutely.
Well, thanks for organizing this.
Laura.
Thanks very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks. Take care.